Well, thank you, Lorrene. That was lovely. It's really wonderful to be here. I had a great time listening to the young woman last night speaking at the reception and having dinner with several of you and chats this morning. So thanks for making me feel so welcome. This is an extremely important topic, and it's proven by the fact that all of you are here and that you're working so hard on this topic to help us find some solutions. I was asked specifically to speak a little bit about what the University of California's Ag and Natural Resources Division is all about, partially because I'm willing to bet a lot of you really don't have any idea. And similarly, I'm willing to bet that in your states, because I know you're here from all over the nation, you may not be familiar with my counterparts in your states. We're in all 50 states plus the territories of the U.S. In fact, we come from a very proud and long tradition that started back in 1862 when President Lincoln signed the Morrill Act creating the land-grant universities. That really was the basis of our start and of the public universities in each and every one of your states. Later on in the 1880s, there was legislation creating the agricultural experiment stations, which actually fund a great deal of the research around not only ag, but food safety, nutrition, and related subjects. And then in 1914, further legislation created cooperative extension. And that has led to having folks out in our state and most states, every single county, that take the research and knowledge developed at our campuses and our research centers and get those into the hands of people. It also created programs that some of you may be familiar with, our very well-known youth development program, 4-H. Now here in California, we're organized a little differently. In fact, every single state organizes their system a little differently. But I want to just describe a couple things about it and then close out with a few thoughts on collaboration and partnerships moving forward, not just in my state, but perhaps for all of you going back home to pursue my colleagues. And I'm sure some of them will be annoyed with me, but so be it. I love collaboration and little more than some perhaps, but I find leveraging resources and working together is a whole lot better than reinventing the wheel and duplicating what's already out there. And given the finite resources that all of us suffer, we've got to start finding these ways to collaborate. So in our state, I oversee almost 1,500 people. About half of those are researchers on our campuses, predominantly Berkeley, Davis, and Riverside, but we've also recently placed people at Merced, Santa Barbara, and are looking to place people at Santa Cruz very soon, and perhaps eventually all 10 campuses. We work closely in partnership with our state universities as well as our community colleges. In addition to our researchers on campus, we have almost 300 researchers out in those county offices. And this is one place where we're a little different than most states. We don't just do research on the campus and then hand it off to what in many of your states is called an extension agent. Our folks in the county office, our academics, are increasingly PhDs, and they are expected to have a very robust research program in their home counties. We find that to be an extremely powerful spectrum, full spectrum of mission-oriented research and community participatory research. And frankly, when the community participates in research, I think they're much more likely to adopt it, and I think a lot of you have had that same experience too. So in our county offices, they largely deliver upon 10 statewide programs and institutes that we have. One that you've already met today, our Nutrition Policy Institute. We also have a Water Research Institute that coordinates water research around the state. I mentioned 4-H. We also have master gardeners, and from that sprang master food preservers. And I got to tell you, that's a real fun program to watch these days, because when I look in on one of the classes, I often see a lot of 20-somethings who think this is some brand new technology that is so cool. And I'm like, oh, honey, your great-grandma was doing that. But I'm so glad you like it now. This is really important. We've also recently created our California Naturalist, which is a master naturalist type program. Integrated pest management, our sustainable ag research program, our ag issue center, and on and on and on. Those programs, those statewide programs, provide a lot of program delivery for our people in the county offices, which are a mix of academics as well as program reps, academic coordinators, and other staff. Part of what helps us deliver, over 20,000 volunteers. 4 of those programs I named are completely volunteer programs. 4-H leaders that help us get those youth going on whatever their project is. Master gardeners, master food preservers, California naturalists. Those are where we actually give average citizens a chance to come in, take some coursework, get that master certificate, and believe me, they love that master certificate. And then they do a lot of work for us. They do an amazing amount of work, all kinds of stuff. In addition to that, we've got 9 research and extension centers scattered around the state that range from a couple hundred to several thousand acres, and they're where folks from campus as well as counties do the research on the ground. So that's kind of a broad overview of who we are, and again, your state's going to look a little different, but not that much different probably. But one of the things I would like all of you to consider is how we can start using those existing programs in much broader, much more innovative ways with more synergy and collaborative. So for example, one of the things we're trying to do here in California is really start connecting our 4-H'ers with our Nutrition Policy Institute and our Master Gardener so that they're doing more growing of food and interacting with school gardens. And then eventually some of them might go into nutrition, cooking, master food preserver. We're also trying to connect 4-H and food-related programs to other partners like multifamily housing, which is one of the things I oversaw in my last job at USDA. Most states have all these huge multifamily housing complexes scattered around your state, both urban and rural, and farm worker housing complexes. We're trying to get 4-H into those kids and then tie it into the whole family for economic development, for little entrepreneurship efforts, and leadership. Then you can start talking about how Cal Naturalists working with 4-H can get to STEM subjects. We're also doing a big initiative on innovation and entrepreneurship where we're tying together out in our more rural, remote counties a troika of the, God, that thing really is hollering at me. A troika of our county cooperative extension office with our community colleges and our county fairgrounds as anchor institutions working together to facilitate a lot of different activities, including one that we're using as an example that has been providing incubator space for makers and entrepreneurs. So these are just a few ideas. We're doing several other things around farm to fork and forest to furniture and regional industry clusters and community and economic development that allows us to then reach into all of our various programs, our research, our partnership, our stakeholders, our volunteers, and really get all of them working together in new and different ways. We're pretty excited in California with what we're doing. I have a hunch when you go home to the other states, if you talk to my colleagues, they're doing some really fun and cool stuff too. So with that, I'm going to close because it's time to get to this wonderful panel here. I'm looking forward to hearing from them. But please, reach out to my colleagues, reach out to my office, to Lorrene, to all of us. Go to your county extension office and say, hey, listen, we want to work together on fighting obesity. I think you'll find people there very, very open to hearing from you. Thank you.
So I think you can see why I adore her. She's got lots of energy. And Glenda, I saw an ad on BART, and it said, above all, do. And I don't know what the ad was for, but I think it should be for you. All right, so we have a wonderful panel on the stage this morning, and it is my pleasure to introduce a few of them. The session is focusing on acknowledging and addressing racism. And this morning I looked up all the types of isms that there are. And it turns out that there are several hundred of them, most of which I had never heard of. But one of the most repressive ones, one of the most daunting ones to overcome, and one of the ones that we need to focus a lot of our attention on is racism. I'm very proud that the committee who put together this panel provided us with a youth who could speak to this topic. I know probably I'm not alone in this room, is that whenever I get down about what's happening politically, what's happening in the world, what's happening in our work, the first thing I do is find somebody young to talk to, because they always refresh and re-energize us, and I know this is what Suriyaan Hussein is going to do. He is a student from Preuss School. I don't say if I Preuss School at the University of California, San Diego. He's a senior there and has been living in San Diego most of his life. His parents are from Somalia and immigrated from there. And for many years, he has been involved in community work. He works hard to be healthy personally, and he also recognizes how crucial it is to have access to healthy food and opportunities to be active, not only for himself, but for his community members. He joined the UC San Diego Youth Advisory Council. Many of others of his peers are sitting in the front here to cheer him on. Do you see what I mean by energy? And the experiences have given him a voice to be an advocate for himself and others. I'm also going to introduce at this time the second speaker, who is Judi Larsen, and I think probably everyone or most everyone in this room, if you don't know Judi, you should. She's the senior program manager at the California Endowment, and she's worked there for many, many years now, as well as at the local level in San Diego, Imperial, and Orange counties, and at the state level on education policy and practice as part of Health Happenings in School campaign. She's been advancing policies and practice to ensure kids of color are supported and successful in the education system. And her current role is to facilitate the development and execution of the endowment's spread and scale strategy that support the goals and vision of building healthy communities across California, and she's going to share more of that with us today. So please welcome and give a warm round of applause to Suriyaan. Change of plans, Judy's going first. All right, great.
Thanks, Lorrene. Good morning, everyone. So I first want to just acknowledge none of this happens just by snapping our fingers. Sacramento State and California Department of Public Health, especially Jesse and Camara, I just want to give them an acknowledgement of all the work that they did. It's not glamorous, but this is what brings us here together. I also want to thank my fellow members of the executive committee. I see a couple of you out there just for your tireless work, and also having the guts to have a panel like this at this conference, so thank you. So as Lorrene mentioned, I work for the California Endowment. For those of you outside of California, we're a statewide health foundation. We're on a journey to build healthier communities, not alone, but with many of you. We know that the work to build healthy communities is complicated, complex, hard. And part of why we are talking about the work today at the conference around racism and the systemic racism that exists is that obesity is a symptom of generations and centuries of racist policies. We have to say that in order to change it. It's okay, you can clap. We can talk about this stuff. Because if we don't talk about it, we're actually not going to be able to change the inequities that exist. We're not going to actually be able to influence the systems and the practices that the people in this room can do. What does it result in? It results in people, by the color of their skin, by their gender, by whatever ism that Lorrene referenced earlier, have different access and different opportunities. That's not the America that my parents immigrated from El Salvador to. And so that's, I think, why we have to continue when we talk about our work around obesity, around why certain communities have arsenic and nitrate in their water and others don't. Why it's easier for farm workers to pick the food but not eat the food. That those are part of policies, systems, and practices that exist in 2017. And so we have to be able to have a conversation about this. We have to be willing to talk about it, and they're uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable conversations, but they have to happen. Not just because Donald Trump's in office. They have to happen if we're really serious and committed about building healthy communities. So I want to challenge all of us. We can either be complacent or complicit. We can exercise our own power in the work that you do every day. We have to always ask ourselves if the work that we're doing is actually benefiting the people that we say it's supposed to benefit, or our institutions. We have to come to this work with humility, grace, and exercise our own power. So it is my pleasure to introduce Suriyaan Hussein, an emerging leader here in San Diego. He's on the UCSD Youth Advisory Council. He was born in Columbus, Ohio, and he's going to share a little bit about his story, and then we'll kick it over to our other panelists. So thank you.
Good morning. How y'all doing tonight? Good morning. First impressions. Okay. So the first thing we're gonna do is I'm asking you guys to get involved in the conversation by please taking out your cell phones or your smartphones and opening up the Obesity Conference app. And once you guys do this, it will load up and there'll be different icons on the screen. Click on the sessions icon. Go ahead. Now, please. And then, so the reason I'm asking you guys to do this is because, once you click on the sessions icon, go to the panel of today, Thursday, June 1st, that says Dismantling the System, Acknowledging and Addressing Racism, and go down to the live polling questions. What these questions do for us, it gives us a live feedback as to what you guys are thinking, and don't worry, they're anonymous. So the first question reads, how comfortable do you feel talking about racism? Now, I asked you guys this question because today we're going to be talking about racism, and racism is something I face every single day. My name is Suriyaan Hussein. I'm a child of an immigrant. I'm a first-generation student. I'm a Muslim American. I'm a black teenager, and I am proud. I grew up in a low-income community in East San Diego, California, called City Heights. Now, growing up as a minority, it seems many times in this country the odds are oftentimes stacked against you. I have to think twice before walking around my neighborhood just because of the way I look. This is one of many examples of fear that people who look like me and that are in my community face on a day-to-day basis. I take a bus every day to school, and it takes 1 hour to get there and 1 hour to get home. I do this to separate myself from distractions in my neighborhood, the numerous liquor stores, the countless smoke shops, and what it seems like millions of fast food chain restaurants. But when I get to school, which is in a more affluent area, the scene drastically changes. You see the numerous places to exercise, the whole food stores, and the cleaning areas that people in those areas live in. I myself have type 1 diabetes, so as a healthy lifestyle was embroidered into me in a young age, to be exact 17 years ago. But when a hamburger costs $1 and a salad costs $3, at the end of the day, I purchase what I can afford rather than what's healthy for me. Things like these need to change. And with the support systems I received, like the organization is United Women of East Africa, I have learned how to use my voice to advocate for change. Because it's not enough to know the problems. But we need everyone and every one of you in the fight against racism. Now, the topic of racial equity is one people oftentimes shy away from. But this is me, this is my parents, this is the life of my neighbors, the life of so many others. Everything that we discuss today will affect me tomorrow, and everybody in this room that wants to make a change for the better, that better affects people like me. So in the name of equity, a trait that this nation strives for, we need to make a change. So what I'm asking every one of you to do is to keep doing what you're doing, but to push harder. Push harder for racial equity, and push harder for people like me. Thank you.
Wow. Right? Something to get excited about, because we're going to have Suriyaan doing work like this for many years. So I'm really excited about you and the work that all of you do at UCSD and the Youth Advisory Board. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Camara Jones. For many of us, she has been a leader in this work for so long. It's a real privilege to have her here at the Obesity Conference. She's a warrior because she's not feeling well, and so I just really appreciate her being here today. She's an immediate past president of the American Public Health Association and a senior fellow at the Satcher Health Leadership Institute and the Cardiovascular Research Institute at Morehouse School of Medicine. Dr. Jones is a family physician and epidemiologist whose work focuses on the impacts of racism on the health and well-being of the nation. She seeks to broaden the national health debate to include not only universal access to high-quality health care, but also attention to the social determinants of health, including poverty and the social determinants of equity, including racism. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Jones.
Good morning. And I normally would give Judi a hug, but she doesn't want what I have. So it's just a little bit of a cold thing. Anyway, I am delighted to be here. It is wonderful that we are naming racism in this panel. In the few minutes that I have, I wanted to just talk about what I did as president of the American Public Health Association, where I launched my presidential initiative, was launching our association and as many partners and community members as would join us on a national campaign against racism with 3 tasks: to name racism, that is, to say the whole word. It's important for us to talk about disparities and implicit bias and cultural competence and all of those things, diversity and inclusion, and even race. But we need to say the whole word racism, because the ism is the thing that makes it a system. I'll talk about that in a minute. But to name racism, and that's what already is happening here at this conference by having this panel. Then we need to ask, so that we know how to intervene, how is racism operating here? In my community, in my workplace, in my child's school, in this country, in this world. And then finally, we need to organize and strategize to act. So my part of this panel is going to be to give you 2 or 3 tools for naming racism and to give a framework for asking how is racism operating here, and then we'll turn to our next speaker who's going to give examples of organizing and strategizing to act, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers, I hope not just among ourselves, but with people here in the room. I'm going to start out with one of my allegories that was sparked by something that happened to me in my real life, because I do a lot of talking about racism through allegory. So this one was based on my experience as a medical student at Stanford. I was studying with some friends. We were studying in my apartment. We were studying long and hard. It got late. We got hungry, and there was no food in my apartment. So we decided to go into town and try to get something to eat. So we go into town, we find a restaurant, we walk in, we sit down, the menus are presented, we order our food is served, here we are eating. Not a very instructive story yet. I'm hoping that most of us have had this experience, right? But as I sat there with my friends eating, I looked across the room and I noticed a sign, and the sign was a startling revelation to me about racism. So now you're saying, where did she say she went to medical school? Stanford? Like, what did the sign say? Well, the sign said open. So I know I've lost you again. But let me recap. Here we are, sitting, eating. I look across the room. I see a sign that says open. If I hadn't thought anything more about it, I would have assumed that other hungry people could walk in, sit down, order their food, and eat. But I realized I knew something about the two-sided nature of those signs, and I recognized that now, because of the hour, the restaurant was indeed closed. And that hungry people, just a few feet away from me, but on the other side of that sign, would not be able to walk in, sit down, order their food, and eat. And then I understood how racism structures open-closed signs in our society. That racism structures a dual reality. And for those who are inside the restaurant, sitting at the table of opportunity, eating, and they look across and they see a sign that says open, they don't even recognize that there's a two-sided sign going on, because it's difficult for any of us to recognize a system of inequity that privileges us. It is difficult for men to recognize male privilege and sexism. It is difficult for white Americans to recognize white privilege and racism. It is difficult for all Americans to recognize our American privilege in the global context, except we got a little taste of that with Ebola, did we not? Yet for those on the other side of the sign, they're very well aware that there's a two-sided sign going on because it proclaims close to them, but they can look through the window and see people inside eating. So back inside the restaurant, to those who ask, is there really a two-sided sign? Does racism really exist? I say, I know it's hard for you to know when you only see open. In fact, that's part of your privilege, not to have to know. But once you do know, you can choose to act. So it's not a scary thing to name racism. It's an empowering thing. In fact, it doesn't even compel you to act, but it does equip you to act, knowing about this two-sided sign, so that if you care about people on the other side of the sign, and that is an if, but if you do, then you could even talk to the restaurant owner who is, after all, inside with you, and you could say, why don't you open the door again? There are hungry people outside. Let them come in. You'll make more money, and oh, the conversations we can have. Or maybe what you'll do is pass food through the door. Maybe you'll break the glass. Maybe you'll tear down the sign. But at least what you won't be doing is sitting back saying, wonder why those people don't just come on in and sit down and eat. Because you'll understand something about the two-sided nature of that sign. So this dual reality story I find to be quite a useful tool, especially for people who were born inside the restaurant and have never ventured out, right? Who don't even wonder, why aren't other people coming in? Who might wonder, what is that noise outside? What are they saying? Black lives matter? Don't they know that all lives matter, right? So for this, we could talk for 3 hours. I've had a 3-hour conversation about how could people know about the two-sided nature of the sign, those who are inside. We don't have that time today. But I encourage you to think about this story and discuss it tonight with somebody who wasn't here, with a spouse, with a child, with a coworker. But what we're going to carry on now is to talk about a more formal definition of racism, which helps us understand not only what is it, but what are its impacts. So when I say the word racism, I am quite clear that I'm talking about a system. So I am not talking about an individual character flaw or a personal moral failing or even a psychiatric illness, as some people have suggested. But I'm talking about a system of power. And it's a system of doing what? It's a system of both structuring opportunity and of assigning value. Two things. And on what basis is the opportunity structured, and on what basis is the value assigned? It's based on so-called race, based on the social interpretation of how one looks, which is what we call race in this country. And we could have an hour discussion about what race is and what race is not. But I'll just give you an example. In Atlanta, where I live, you look at me, I'm clearly black, right? In some parts of Brazil, you look at me, I'm just as clearly white. In South Africa, you look at me, I'd be just as clearly colored. Here I am, same physical appearance, but the social interpretation of my appearance in those three settings would assign me to 3 different racial groups. And furthermore, if I were to stay in any of those settings long enough, my health outcome would probably take on that of the group to which I've been assigned, even though I'd have the same genes in all 3 places. So that's just an example. And I have to tell you, everybody in this room, there is someplace else on this earth that you would have a different race from what you think you have here in this country right now. So now, if race is this social interpretation of how we look, and racism is the system that operates on that so-called race to structure opportunity and assign value, what are the impacts of this system? Well, when we think or talk about racism at all, which is not frequently enough, in fact, many people would think, oh, well, racism, was an unfortunate chapter in our nation's history, but they're in denial that it continues to exist and have profound impacts on the health and well-being of the nation. But when we do think and talk about it, we understand that racism is unfairly disadvantaging some individuals and communities. But it shouldn't take us long to recognize that every unfair disadvantage has its reciprocal unfair advantage. So this is a second impact of racism, what some people might call unearned white privilege that we hardly ever talk about in this country, because it makes white people uncomfortable. And I'm hoping, but I know that I've probably made somebody uncomfortable just saying those words today. So I want you to shake it off because, maybe even that open-close sign can help you understand the reality of that kind of dynamic. But I want you to shake it off because there's a third impact of racism that we hardly ever consider, and that is how racism saps the strength of our whole society through the waste of human resources. I'll give you two examples of that. The first is how we as a nation are not yet vigorously investing in the full excellent public education of all of our children, because the blinders of racism have made us believe, right? These blinders of racism have made some of us believe there is no genius in the barrios or the ghettos or on the reservations. We can get along very well, thank you, without those children. But of course, there's genius in all of our communities. And if we were to only, thank you. If we were to only fully and vigorously invest in that genius, manifest right here by one of my co-panelists, we were to only fully invest in that genius, we could be doing so much better as a nation or even as a world. We might already be up on Mars farming, if that were a good idea, if we were to invest in that genius. But we wouldn't have to go out into space. We could be solving the problems in our communities today if we were to invest in all that genius. A second example I'll give you of how racism saps the strength of the whole society is how those same blinders that don't value all of us equally have made us as a nation complacent with what I describe as the wholesale warehousing disproportionately of so many black and brown men in our prison system, as if that didn't separate us from human potential. And if you know any people, who are stuck in the prisons or else cycling in and out, because if you come out with a felony conviction, it's hard to get a job. It's hard to get housing. In some states, you can't even ever vote again, right? So we have to interrupt the cycling. We have to interrupt the disproportionate incarceration. But if you know any of these people, then you know that there are many geniuses caught up in this system that if there had only been some other way could be contributing quite productively to our society. And so actually of the three points that I made there about the impacts of racism, the unfair disadvantage, the reciprocal unfair advantage, and how racism saps the strength of the whole society, I actually think we need to spend a lot more attention on that third point. We need to have more media coverage about how racism is sapping the strength of all of us. We need more data collection, students especially. We need more conversations around our dinner table so that we can have more people filled with a sense of urgency to dismantle this system and put in its place a system in which all people can know and develop to their full potentials. I want to just say two more things about this definition, and then I'm going to do my third tool, and then we'll wrap it up. This definition, first of all, when I'm talking about racism as a system, I am so clear that I'm not trying to go in a room and decide who's racist and who's not. I'm not trying to divide the room. And actually, I had a very interesting conversation with a seatmate on a plane talking about every time I say racism, he hears me calling him racist. Well, that's not what we're doing, right? Because this is a system that impacts all of us. But the other thing before I leave this slide is I have had the experience in my workplace when I was presenting, having these kinds of slides, and I was talking about unfair disadvantage and its reciprocal unfair advantage. The point was made, there's disadvantage and there's normal, right? Many people are walking around thinking there's disadvantage and then there's normal. And that's because we are ahistorical and we do not realize that some people's normal is built up on a whole mountain of unfair advantage. So now I'm going to very quickly describe three levels of racism that can help us understand, well, how could that system turn into increased obesity prevalences in some communities versus others? How can it turn into differences in asthma prevalence or differences in heart disease rates and the like? So I'm going to describe these 3 levels of racism: institutionalized, personally mediated, internalized. I'm going to very quickly give you some examples of how they can impact health, and then I'm going to illustrate them with my gardener's tale allegory. And before I start, just so I get a sense of the room, how many of you are familiar with my gardener's tale? Please raise your hand. Are. Okay. Okay, so that's good. For those of you all, as I tell the story, I want you to pretend you're in a train the trainer session, right? I want you to listen to the nuances of the storytelling so that you can have confidence in telling it back. For the others, I want it to just let it wash over you. But first, the definitions, very quickly. Institutionalized racism is the system, if you will. It's the constellation of structures, policies, practices, norms, and values that results in differential access to the goods, services, and opportunities of society by race. This is the kind of racism that doesn't require an identifiable perpetrator, because it's been institutionalized in our laws, customs, background norms. We see it as in terms of inherited disadvantage and its reciprocal inherited advantage. We see it in terms of access to material conditions as well as access to power. So very quickly, differential access by race to quality housing, equal educational opportunities, equal employment opportunities, even the same level of income at the same level of employment. Those things clearly have impact on health. Differential access to medical facilities, including linguistic access, differential access to a clean environment, and the whole very well documented disproportionate placement of toxic dump sites or bus transfer stations in communities of color. And then in terms of power, differential access to power's information, which could be health information or nutrition information or physical activity information, or it could even be information about our own histories. Differential access to power's resources, not just capital resources, but social networking resources, knowing somebody on the board, and then differential access to power as voice in government, media, or the like. Usually I spend a lot of time here because some people have stopped me before and saying, when you look at that top set of examples, housing, education, employment, income, Dr. Jones, isn't that what we call social class? Why do you have that on a slide about racism? Are you talking about racism, or are you really, really talking about social class? It's an important question. My answer starts with the observation that it doesn't just so happen that people of color in this country are overrepresented in poverty while white people in this country are overrepresented in wealth. And for each marginalized or stigmatized or oppressed group of color, there's been some initial historical injustice. And usually I go through a whole litany for all of the different groups, but I'm looking at my time here. So I'm going to start from the beginning, and then I'm going to pick up another group, and then we're going to race through so I can tell the story in its fullness. So for American Indians, the initial historical injustice was the taking of the land, right? And the near genocide, and then the moving of survivors to reserved lands, reservations, and then in some instances, something was good was found under one reservation. Oops, you got to pick them up and move them somewhere else. We had people who for centuries lived in Mexico and they didn't cross the border crossed them, and they found themselves in New Mexico or Arizona, California, and the like. Their children still being harassed. The exploitation of farm workers and farm worker labor in this country that continues. The exploitation of Chinese labor in terms of people who are brought here to build our railroads, unable by law to bring their families, unable by law to marry. The internment of Japanese folks during World War II, and the fear we have that we might be coming up to another internment in these days. And for people of African descent, the initial historical injustice was the kidnapping of West African people and our importation across the Atlantic with tremendous loss of life in the Middle Passage. And then for the survivors and their progeny for generations, what I describe as the coerced usury of our unpaid labor for centuries to build this country. But then some people hear me talking about that and they say, Dr. Jones, there you go talking about slavery. Dr. Jones, we all know that slavery was an unfortunate chapter in our nation's history, but Dr. Jones, don't you know the enslaved people were emancipated by 1865, and we're now in 2017, so that's 152 years ago. So Dr. Jones, all else being equal, don't you think the impacts of slavery would have washed out by now? But the key phrase in that question, of course, is all else being equal, and all else has not been equal since 1865, and all else still is not equal today, and there are still what I describe as contemporary structural factors, present-day structural factors that are perpetuating each of these initial historical injustices. So that when people ask me, are you talking about racism or are you really, really talking about social class, I say that institutionalized racism, which includes these present-day structural factors, explains why we see an association between social class and race in this country. I could go on a lot more, but I just want to close on the institutionalized racism by saying that it can be through acts of doing, acts of commission, as well as acts of not doing, acts of omission, and very often institutionalized racism shows up as inaction in the face of need. Second level of racism, that's it. The second level of racism, personally mediated racism, I define as differential assumptions about the abilities, motives, and intents of others by race, and then differential actions based on those assumptions. This is what most people think of when they hear the word racism. It's the different idea, the prejudice, and the different action, the discrimination. Many examples of how it can impact health. Police brutality. I could go through 5 minutes of a litany of names that have come to attention, national attention recently, of unarmed black and brown men and women who've been killed by police without much accountability, but we don't have time today. Physician disrespect could be as subtle as a physician not giving a patient the full range of treatment options because the physician looks at the patient and thinks that patient couldn't afford or wouldn't comply or wouldn't understand or whatever they assume. Or it could be quite blatant, like sterilization abuse, which has many iterations in our nation's history. Examples of, what some people call everyday racism, shopkeeper vigilance, being followed around in stores, waiter indifference, not getting quick, respectful treatment, which might be related to elevated blood pressures in communities of color, blood pressures that don't even go down at night, and teacher devaluation. That's a profound, personally mediated example of racism, because if a teacher looks at a young child and thinks that child can't learn and puts them off in the ADD track, that child will never even know their full potential, much less have the opportunity to develop to their full potential. Before I leave this level, I have to say that personally mediated racism, like institutionalized, can be through acts of doing, acts of commission, as well as acts of not doing, acts of omission. But even more important to recognize with this level is that it can be unintentional as well as intentional. You do not have to have intended to do something racist to have had a racist impact. The third level of racism I'm going to define from the point of view of members of the stigmatized races as acceptance by members of stigmatized races of negative messages about our own abilities and intrinsic worth. Now, I've been challenged by some of my friends who do anti-racism training who say, well, Camara, what about the internalized sense of entitlement that many white people walk around with? Isn't that also internalized racism? And yes, it is. And I actually should expand my slide, but I haven't yet. But I think it can have, I never could understand the negative health impacts of that until recently. So ask me a question about that if you want to know. But on this slide, we're talking about how it affects people who are stigmatized, so self-devaluation, feeling maybe I'm really not as good as, maybe I shouldn't try to graduate from high school or apply to that college or try to get that job or live in that neighborhood. The white man's eyes is colder syndrome. That phraseology in my parents' generation means the same thing for some of us today. If you're a person of color and you need a lawyer, you might actually go seek out a white lawyer over a black lawyer. Or if you needed a doctor, you might prefer a white doctor over a black doctor. Or in fact, if your lemonade were warm, you might go way down the street to get the white man's ice over the black man's ice, deeply believing that the white man's ice is colder. Deeply internalizing the myth of white superiority. Resignation, helplessness, hopelessness turns to a lot of self-destructive health behaviors, turns into not registering to vote, turns into not voting even if you have registered, and that can have health impacts as well. And it's really about members of stigmatized races accepting the limitations to our own full humanity of the box into which we've been placed. So I'm going to illustrate these three levels of racism with my Gardener's Tale allegory. And this was sparked by something I saw with my own real eyes, but I'm not going to have a chance to tell you what I saw with my own real eyes. Suffice it to say that my husband and I bought a house, had some flower boxes. We were planting the same kind of flowers in the flower boxes, but some of the boxes were empty at first. My husband had gone and gotten some rich, fertile soil to put in some of the boxes. The other boxes we didn't know had poor, rocky soil. So that's the basis of it, right? So here we go with the Gardener's Tale. We have a gardener who has two flower boxes, one which she knows to have rich, fertile soil, and one which she knows to have poor, rocky soil. And she has seed for the same kind of flowers, except some of the seed is going to produce pink blossoms, and some of the seed is going to produce red blossoms. And the gardener prefers red over pink. So what does she do? She puts the red seed in the rich fertile soil, pink seed in the poor rocky soil. 3 weeks later, she sees in her flower boxes what I actually saw with my own eyes and mine. In that rich fertile soil, all the red seed sprouts, the strong red seed grows tall and vigorous, even the weak red seed's made it halfway up. In the poor rocky soil, the weak pink seed dies. Here comes the strong pink seed struggling to make it to a middling height. And then in those 2 flower boxes, those flowers go to seed. And the next year, same thing happens. And then those flowers go to seed. And year after year after year after year, the same thing happens until finally, about 10 years later, the gardener's looking at her flower boxes, and then she says, you know, I was right to prefer red over pink. So we interrupt the story there to say, the first part of this story is how institutionalized racism works, where you had the initial historical injustice of the separation of the seed into the 2 types of soil, yet contemporary structural factors of the flower boxes keeping the soil separate, and then through inaction in the face of neat perpetuation of the inequity. But let's pick the story back up to say, well, where is personally mediated racism in the garden? Well, gardener's looking over at red, thinking red is just beautiful. And then she looks at the pink flowers and she says, oh, those pink flowers sure are scrawny and scraggly, so she plucks off the pink blossoms before they can even go to seed. Or maybe she notices that a pink seed has blown into the rich fertile soil, so she plucks it out before it can establish itself, which is some of the anti-affirmative action stuff that goes on. And where, right? And where would internalized racism be in the garden? Well, the red flowers are just living their lives, enjoying being red, many of them not even understanding or acknowledging that they're benefiting from enriched soil. Pink flowers are looking over at red, thinking red is mighty fine and wishing with all their hearts that they too could be red. And here come the bees, minding their own business, but collecting nectar and pollinating at the same time. So here comes a bee, bzzz, into one of the pink flowers, and then bzzz, to another pink flower, and bzzz, to this pink flower, and this flower's like, get away from me, bee. Don't bring me any of that pink pollen. I prefer the red, because the pink flower has internalized that red is better than pink. So now the question arises, what do we do to set things right in this garden? Well, we could start by addressing the internalized racism. So we could go over to the pink flowers and we could say, pink is beautiful, power to the pink, right? It's an important intervention. But if that's all we do, it's not going to change the situation in which the pink flowers find themselves. Or maybe you say, okay, well, let's address the personally mediated racism. Let's have a conversation with the gardener. Or better yet, let's have a workplace multicultural workshop for the gardener, right? It's all good. So we have our workshop. In the workshop, we say, dear gardener, would you please stop plucking those pink flowers? And maybe she will, and maybe she won't. But even if she does, it's not going to change the situation in which the pink flowers find themselves. If we really want to set things right in the garden, we need to address the institutionalized racism, which means that we need to either break down the boxes and mix up the soil, or if we want to keep separate boxes, that's all right too, although it makes it easier for the gardener to continue segregating resources going forward. But if we keep separate boxes, it means we need to enrich that poor rocky soil until it is as rich as the rich fertile soil. And when we do that, the pink flowers will flourish. They'll be looking beautiful, grand, and glorious, so that in that intervention on the institutionalized racism, we may also address the internalized racism. Because now pink won't be looking over at red, thinking red is better and wanting to be red. And in that intervention, we may also address the personally mediated racism. The original gardener may have to go to her grave preferring red over pink, but her children who grow up and see the flowers equally beautiful will be less likely to have that kind of attitude. So this story is meant to illustrate the 3 levels of racism and to strongly suggest that we need to at least address institutionalized. Good if we address all the levels at the same time, but at least address the institutionalized. And when we do, the other levels may take care of themselves. My time is at 0, but I just want to ask one more question, which is, who is the gardener? Because after all, the gardener is the one that I gave the power to decide, the power to act, and control of resources, which in my mind are actually the elements of self-determination. So who is a gardener? Well, gardener can be, government's a huge part of the gardener, but not the only part. It includes media, foundations, corporations, even communities to the extent that they have self-determination. But whoever the gardener is, it is dangerous when the gardener is allied with one group. I painted her red, that's why she prefers red over pink. And it's also dangerous when she's not concerned with equity, when she can look at her flower boxes and think that her garden is beautiful, thank you, because she's not even counting the pink flowers as part of her garden. And so our challenge is what to do about the gardener. To make the gardener stripe, polka dotted fuchsia? Do the pink flowers have to grow or recruit their own gardener? Lots of questions that can come out of that. We will stop for now. I will yield the floor to my colleague, and we'll carry on the conversation. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I love that energy. Keep it up, everyone. We need to keep having that energy for the work that we all want to do moving ahead. Our next speaker is Dr. Xavier Morales. He's the executive director of the Praxis Project, a national network of organizations advancing health justice through building community power. Taking an expansive view of community health, he has spent over 2 decades advancing community-led initiatives and programs across the social determinants of health. Dr. Morales played a role in passing Berkeley's tax on sugary drinks and now chairs the panel of experts that recommends school and community investments to improve our residents' health. Dr. Morales is originally from Sanger, California. For those of you not from California, the Central Valley, where a lot of our food is grown, and studied environmental sciences at the University of California, Berkeley, and city and regional planning at Cornell University. It's my pleasure to have Dr. Morales come up and share some reflections.
Thanks. All right, following Dr. Jones. I feel really honored to be up here sharing the stage with her. I've been in the audience so many times for the incredible way that you phrase things and form things that just make it so clear. You know, it's almost like, duh, it's so awesome. Thank you for that. And I'd also like to thank the conference organizers and the sponsors. I'd especially like to thank Judi for the work that she's been doing to help organize, and Pat Crawford, I know she's around here somewhere, for first approaching me to maybe be on this panel. I'd also like to thank, here they are, the Luceño, Cabrillo, Cuyeno, Cunha, Yard, Digueños, and the La Jolla peoples for allowing us to occupy this space, borrowing it from them today, for these 3 days. Praxis, we are a national nonprofit, and we work with community organizers across the country. And when you talk to them, they wouldn't describe that what they're doing is to advance health. But when you have a strong social determinants of health, health equity frame, you start to recognize just how much impact they're having on the work that we're doing. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about some experiences that I've had with that. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Berkeley soda tax, because 2 nights ago, I almost didn't have a PowerPoint, but I apologize because it's going to be death by PowerPoint this morning. But I almost didn't have a PowerPoint because 2 nights ago we were presenting the budget to our city council. It's the second round of investments that we're recommending, and I'll give you a little bit of background on that. It's incredible the great public health successes we've had in the 20th century. I mean, you look at this: immunizations, healthier mothers and babies, motor vehicle safety, family planning, workplace safety, fluoridation of drinking water, control of infectious diseases, tobacco as a health hazard, declines in deaths from heart disease and stroke, and safer and healthier foods. I mean, this is incredible. The amount of work that's gone into making this happen, making our society a safer, healthier place. But when we actually start to think about this and start to actually dig into the data, hard as these successes were, did they reach all corners of society? How far up this tree did we get when we're picking the fruit of success, of health success? And when you look at the data today, look at infant mortality, we still have huge disparities. Childhood weights. I don't know if you can see it back there, but Hispanic, Latino, Black only, not Hispanic, those are the highest rates that are still existing. Motor vehicle safety, American Indians, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islanders, those are topping the charts here. Motor vehicle safety, alcohol, race, and ethnicity. Again, Native Americans, Hispanics, Native Hawaiians, other Pacific Islanders, and African Americans are all topping the charts here. When we look at family planning and teen pregnancy rates, Hispanics, African Americans, American Indians, all still have very high disproportionate rates. And even though Asian is coming out lower, within the Asian community, this is a problem, actually, the way we aggregate data as well, because within the Asian community, we have subpopulations that are experiencing really high rates of some of these things. Some of my Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, some of the immigrants from Southeast Asia as well. Oral health, this is a reverse one, because you'll see that teeth condition for whites is the highest, and you'll see that the numbers, I'm sorry, I gotta lean over here to see my confidence monitor. That's what they call it, a confidence monitor. I learned that this morning. So American Indians, you'll see that there's still disparities that exist, huge disparities. Reportable infectious diseases. Again, people of color are experiencing the highest rates. These are all the things that the CDC monitors for, surveils for. Same thing for gonorrhea rates, shigellosis. Tobacco, look at tobacco rates. I mean, whites are still high, but look at the Native American, Alaska Native. But inequality continues, inequality persists. We see racial gaps in household income. We see racial gaps in wealth. And just even income today. And the thing that really gets to me when I look at all of these charts is that this is somehow becoming normalized. When we look at these charts, it's almost become an expectation that this is just the way things are. We see the charts and we don't question why. This is just, it's a target population that we need to do better in. What programs can we put in place to try to address this? But, to me, it's becoming too normal. There's a big immigration right now. Immigration is a really hot topic here in the United States. And, when we talk about mixed status families, we talk about what it's like for them and how they're living. I don't think that we actually grasp and feel just what this really means. Imagine you go home right now, today, or tomorrow at the end of this conference, and you get home and your spouse is gone. Imagine your child goes to school. You come home, or the child goes to school, parent usually picks him or her up at the end of the day, but nobody comes. Imagine, just seeing your spouse go to work. This is how visceral these conditions are for folks. And when I look at inequality, and I look at income, I look at kids being pushed out of school, I look at teenage pregnancies, you gotta feel that same sense of urgency. I really like the way you talked about urgency, because this has become normal. And unfortunately, for some of us too, us meaning people from communities of color, this has also become normal for whatever reason. But this is not normal. It should not be normal. And we need to do everything we can to combat it. We need to feel it. We need to feel it. And if we don't authentically feel it, that's okay, as long as we give space for those who do and help them make the advances that they need to make. I'll talk a little bit more about that. As inequality persists, the more place is mattering to health. I think many of you have seen these life expectancy maps that show the gradient. Like this is Washington, D.C. If you live in the middle of Washington, D.C., your life expectancy is 77 years. But as you go out to Montgomery County or Fairfax County, you see that it's 84. Huge difference. Prince George's County, you see a little bit of a difference, a little bit higher, but when you look at the racial makeup of what's going on in Montgomery County, Fairfax County, Arlington, you start to see that those are whiter areas. And the center of D.C., African American, and Prince George's County, a large African American population as well. So I didn't ask for permission from the endowment to use this slide, so I use it all the time. Hope I'm not violating any copyrights. But this is another slide that just really hit home for me what it is that we do, why we do the work that we do. Zip codes. This child that's born in zip code 95219, which I think is in Stockton. I used to know this by heart, but I think it's in Stockton, is 73 years old. A child born today is expected to live 73 years. You're all public health folks, so you know all the math that's behind this. I think the second is Newport Beach. I've used a few different ones. I don't know if that's the Newport Beach ones or the Palo Alto one, but regardless, it's a higher, wealthier area where a child born today is expected to live 88 years. And this is just the act of being born. This is their life expectancies. And they've been calculated based on the aggregate of what's going on in their environments. Now, there's a number of different lists that are out there. This is the list that I like. This is the list that I use. I didn't just make it up, by the way. I mean, this is from research. I may have retitled some things, regrouped some things, but this is the one that we use in our work. You know, these are the ingredients that give and take away days of life. How robustly present these determinants are will determine how long our children that are being born today will live. You know, this is a whole hour conversation because I'm sure there's things on here that people will be like, I don't know how that fits, and I'd love to get into that at some point. I don't have race and identity as its own separate factor. And some lists do, because I believe that race and identity are actually embedded in every single determinant, how robustly present these are or how absent they are. So that's just a little disclaimer that I have at the bottom. I got to remind myself where I'm at. And so, for all the public health work that we've done, the social services that we've done, the direct services that we've done, I think it's incredible. But I think that too often we're not valuing some other resources that are available to us that exist in the community already. And those are community organizations. And so here's a short list of just some of my partners. I apologize for how small the font is, but I was just, thinking that, I can give examples like 10 different groups working on all these different things. And really what it is for me is that in an era, organizers move policy. The same way many advocates move policy, but at different times, under different conditions, some of them may have more leverage, more power, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But, the 8-hour workday, think about the fights that had to happen to get the 8-hour workday. Was it and I don't want to disparage anybody, so I apologize if this comes off disparagingly. I appreciate all the work all of us do. But who was on the front line getting their heads beat in to fight for the 8-hour workday? There's a lot of organizers, a lot of union organizers. We look at the women's suffrage movement. Who was on the front lines getting their heads beat in to get that right to vote? We look at desegregation of schools. Who was on the front line getting their heads bashed in, and I'm not exaggerating here, to get that right to go to school? Today, Black Lives Matter's out in the streets, and there's a reason for that. I really feel that our undocumented children that are out there in the streets trying to protect their families and their parents, they're the ones that are out there. They're putting everything on the line in order to change things. So, that passion, that authenticity, that moves things. And in this era, when science and facts are not being heard, what do? We have a system right now, and again, I'm not trying to disparage anyone. I apologize for apologizing for apologizing. The system we have right now is one especially the public health system, part of it, is one where we are producing research and producing facts to give to legislators to move legislation to help address some of these inequities. But when facts aren't being acknowledged in this period, what it's becoming is more, it's power. Who has the power? When I used to work for Latino Coalition for a Healthy California, I was the executive director there, and we co-sponsored some legislation. I remember going and talking with legislators and bringing them the facts. This is the facts. These are the number of amputations in your district. These are the number of people with diabetes, pre-diabetes in your district. This is how much it's costing your local health system. This is how much it's costing you. And we're trying to get a health impact fee passed. And you know, all the facts are there. And we thought that we had their vote overnight. We come back the next day, something changed. They went to dinner, there was a reception, something changed. In this time, when facts are being valued less, we really need to start investing in community power, community mobilization, community organizing, so that we can create the conditions so that these electeds who are ignoring the science and the facts will feel some kind of tension if they vote against that. And who are the folks that do this? The folks that do this are the community organizers. They're the ones that are standing out there blocking the vans. They're the ones that are out there, you know, picketing. They're the ones out at Standing Rock trying to protect our water. But how do we work with community organizers? How do we work with community groups? You know, it's not just showing up. It's relationship driven, very relationship driven. Here's a set of principles that were developed by the Hemes, they're called the Hemes principles. When you go and approach a community organizing group and you want to work with them on an issue, you know, you got to be inclusive. You got to come in. You got to be inclusive. You got to emphasize bottom up, the power that exists in the community. We're not there to empower anybody. The power is already there. What we're there to do is to help them harness that power. And sometimes using the word help, that's a little lowercase h, and it might even be lower than the rest of the letters, but we're there to be there to support. We work together in solidarity and mutuality. We build relationships, just relationships, equal relationships, and we commit ourselves to self-transformation, because when you show up, you may think you know everything about this subject, but there is a lot of community wisdom out there that, here's a question. If a tree falls in the forest and a public health researcher isn't there to record it, did it really fall? You know, I say that facetiously. I should apologize. But there are so many things that our communities have had to develop because there were no services being provided to our communities, so they had to figure it out on their own and provide for themselves. You know, urban farms, you know, we've been doing that for years because we live in many neighborhoods that one would label as food apartheid neighborhoods. Been doing that for years. Mutual assistance. We've had to develop a lot of the systems to fill in where the government wasn't filling in, or other social services. I got the 5-minute mark, but I got 4:39. Oh, well, I'll hurry. All right, so I'm really proud that 2 nights ago, we presented to the Berkeley City Council, I chair the commission that recommends the investments, that we presented to the Berkeley City Council our list of recommendations for investments. I'm really proud that it was put on the consent agenda and it was passed as a consent agenda. For 3 years, our coalition has held. For 3 years, our coalition that first put forth this idea of a tax, has held. And the reason is because we were inclusive from the very beginning in who we brought to the table to make sure everyone was at the table. We weren't trying to figure out halfway through the campaign how to message on regressivity, because the way we designed the measure itself by having folks that would claim regressivity were there at the table to help try to design where the funds were going to go. And this coalition that came together and took on the beverage industry, and this is a whole nother presentation. I got beautiful slides. It's really, well, toot my own horn, it's a really good presentation. You guys should see it. We took them on, and we rejected quite a bit of mainstream public health wisdom on how to do these things. Because what we did, it was an organic initiative that came from our community to fill a need, and we designed it. We went out, we had no money. We realized that the beverage industry was putting out 3 mailers a week, and the only way we could combat this was going door to door, street by street, block by block, and that was the only way we were going to win, and we did it, and we won. But the reason that we did it was, initial reason was we wanted to protect the health of Berkeley's children, especially our African American Latino children, who are predicted to, over 50% of us are going to have diabetes at some point in our lifetime. We had that seared in our minds that this is why we were doing it. And so I'm really happy to report that 3 years into this coalition has held. The fact that this was a consent agenda item that just got passed, again, that was major, because the stronger you build your coalition, the harder it will be to undo what you do. So there were a couple of other things. Let me see. I'm running out. I have like 1 minute and 42 seconds. It's not allowing me to forward. I guess it wants me to stop on the soda tax. All right, I got 1 minute 27 left. I'm going to tell you guys a story. Can I turn this on over here? Thanks. When you go work with communities, you have to understand that many of our communities have experienced trauma. Dr. Jones started to allude to, or you stated a lot of the traumas that we have. So I'm going to tell you a story about, it's going to take a little bit longer than a minute. It'll take 2 minutes. So out of my PhD, I went into a postdoc at Arizona State University. And my first job was to go and find out why these long-term Latino residents were not participating in these charrettes that the city was holding to redevelop the downtown. And they're like, why? Tempe was founded by Mexican immigrants that had come up to work the railroads and the mines. And so everybody knew these families. These families lived in a neighborhood right next to the downtown. And so the city staff were like, why aren't they coming? They should come. We sent out all the information in Spanish and in English. We don't understand. And I'm like, first thing, I'm like, they've been here since the 1800s. I think they're okay on the English. But after going and doing research with them, what I found out was, the first reason was the city's going to do whatever the city wants to do. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter if I come. They're going to do whatever they want to do. And I asked them, well, why is that? And to a T, every single person I interviewed, and I interviewed over 30 families, they were like, well, we used to live in this barrio. It was called the Barrio Mickey Mouse. And from one day to the next, they came in and they red tagged all of our houses, and we had to be out of there within like 3 months. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Well, that's where Sun Devil Stadium is now. If you guys ever go to a football game or something at Tempe at Sun Devil Stadium, that's where Sun Devil Stadium sits. So then a week, some years pass, and then again, city comes in, all the houses are red tagged in this other neighborhood that they had moved to. They moved to this barrio called El Barrio de Arriba. And so, again, same thing, 3 months, they all got to move. And so they all leave and they move to this other neighborhood now that's adjacent to the downtown. That's called El Barrio de Abajo. And that's where they're living now. And the city's coming in and saying, hey, we really want you guys to come. We have food, we have all this. And they're trying to get them to come. And they don't understand the trauma that these folks have already experienced. The city, some things are said like, oh, they're just lazy, they don't care about this. That's the thing that makes me the maddest, when people say that when they don't really understand what's happened. 2 other reasons. They felt like everyone knew everyone already, so they felt like an outsider, even though they had the deepest roots in the community than any others in the community. The third was the language that's being used. The language, talking about pocket parks, transit overlays, just all that language that we use on a regular daily basis, they just felt like outsiders. And so, we need to remember this when we want to engage with community. It's not a one-shot deal, it's relationship building. It's mutual, respectful relationship building that acknowledges the past that people have come through to get to where they are today. Thank you.
Can we give it one more time for our panelists here? Okay. So I'm going to ask one question, and Judy's going to ask one, and we're going to open up to the audience. And the question I have is, how do we get people, like the youth, to talk about it more? And then a step after that is, what do we tell them to do to fight racism?
Why don't we change chairs?
Rock over here.
I have a lot of
Suriyaan, what is your question?
I said, how do we, especially for the youth, how do we get them to talk about it more? And then a step after that is, what do we tell them to do to fight racism?
So the first thing is for youth to recognize that structures and systems are real and exist. So it's to get beyond the notion of individual responsibility. Actually, there are three things that young people have to realize in order to go forward. And there are three big barriers we have in achieving health equity at all in our country. One is that we're very narrowly focused on the individual, which means that structures and systems are either invisible or irrelevant. So you need to not just say, oh, I'm so glad I'm graduating and those other people over on the other side of town, they must not work hard or whatever. You have to acknowledge that these systems and structures are real and in place. And even as you know that you're smart and hardworking and all, young people have to recognize there have been smart, hardworking people in this country for centuries, and it's only recently that we're getting more opportunity, but not all of us are getting more opportunity. And so even as you're succeeding, you can't opt into the thing that looks down on other people who are not. So you have to be kind of in solidarity and recognize there are things that help some people that aren't available for all. The second big barrier that young people have to recognize and address is that we as a nation are ahistorical. So Dr. Morales talked about that even in terms of community organizing. People don't know the history of a community that they want to partner with, Well, you need to know not only your own personal history, you need to know the history of this nation, of the various nations, you need to know the history of communities. So that's like study history. Not just in a little way like American history or whatever, but like become really interested in how did things come to be the way they are. And then the third thing I would say is to abandon or challenge the myth of meritocracy. The story that goes something like this: if you work hard, you'll make it. Now, most people, I'm not saying don't work hard, and most people who have made it have worked hard. But not everybody who's made it has worked hard, and there are other people who are working just as hard or harder who will never make it because of an uneven playing field. So it's getting back to that first thing. So you have to really understand that it's not about individual effort and it's not about I'm smarter or whatever. Young people have to be in solidarity and have to be able to see systems that exist. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, I'm kind of, I have a 10-year-old, and I tell him to work as hard as he can. I try to give him the background that he doesn't get in schools. He just did a mission thing in California. They all do mission stuff. And so, we sat down and we talked about the deeper history on this system. He needs to understand that. And then the other thing is, I want him to read ethnic literature. I want him to feel good about himself. But the thing is, he can't only read that because he has to read the regular canon to understand that. And then on top of that, he has to understand himself. Because without understanding what the regular canon says, what you learn about yourself, it's harder to contextualize it. So, and always take the hardest classes you can take, all math classes, statistics classes.
Yes. And may I also, I just want to come back, be courageous. Well, I have three things. Be courageous. So be unafraid of controversy. Be courageous, embrace challenge, like the fact that you got up here and you opened up this panel. You know what I'm saying? Somebody could have given you that opportunity and you could have been like, oh, I don't know if I can do it. No, you embraced challenge. And the thing is that when you embrace challenge, the person who's giving you the opportunity already knows that you can make it. You might feel a little unsure, but it's by doing things and learning your power, right, that you grow in the knowledge of yourself. The second is be curious, ask why, don't just take things at face value. And the third is be concerned about the whole, be concerned about more than yourself, be a citizen.
Okay. We are out of time, but I want to, first of all, just thank the panelists. I want to thank you all for sort of being in the space, cozy space with about, 1,400 people to talk about racism. I want to encourage you to continue to have these conversations around the actions, the programs, and the initiatives that you lead, and really call the questions out around, is this really helping the communities that we say we want to help? And I really just hope that we can continue to have these conversations with each other so that it isn't uncomfortable anymore, that we're really able to talk about this in the work that we do. So thank you, everyone.
Judi, may I say some more stuff, though, that are like real tools?
Go ahead.
Because in my slides, I cut myself short. What Dr. Morales was talking about illustrated, I think that if we take the question, how is racism operating here, looking at structures, which are the who, what, when, and where of decision-making, who's at the table and who's not, what's on the agenda, what's not, policies, which are the written how of decision-making, practices and norms, which is the unwritten how of decision-making, and values as the why, that's something so you could say, it's an exercise I encourage all of you to do. How is racism operating here, looking at structures, policies, practices, norms, and values? The elements of decision-making is power. That's power. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, some people have asked, well, how do I make achieving health equity real? What are the principles? So I just want to give you 3 principles to know if you're in the right direction. Achieving health equity requires at least these 3 things: valuing all individuals and populations equally. So that means having affected people at the table in the decision-making process. The second is recognizing and rectifying historical injustices. Anytime somebody's trying to solve a problem, city councils need to have a historian there. How did the problem come to be that way, right? So that you can untangle that knot. And the third is providing resources according to need, having the political spine not to distribute resources equally, but to provide resources according to need. So sometimes there might be a community that doesn't get anything this year or the next year or next year because they really don't need. So I just wanted to offer those 3 things as operational ways that you can figure out, am I going in the right direction or not?
Great. Thank you.
Wow. I wish I had that much energy when I was well, let alone when I was sick. So I know you have all been treated to an amazing session this morning. I just want, yes, thank you. You have not only informed us, and I know I'll never look at a flower box the same again, but you've energized us and empowered us, and I hope you take that energy with you to the sessions today. We have an action-packed schedule, and I know if you're like me, there's 5 things you want to do all at the same time. So choose wisely, participate fully. The sessions will be going all day until 5. And then starting at 5:30 to 6:30, those of you, and I know you're all in this together, who value youth voices, we have a special treat where we are going to have some youth talking about their engagement with the diabetes conversation. And they're going to be in one of these broken down rooms from 5:30 to 6:30. All right, so before we go on to the sessions, is the Pod Squad coming? All right, so you've all heard of the Mod Squad. How many people have heard of the Pod Squad? Well, maybe you haven't all heard of the Mod Squad. If you're my age, you have, right? How many of you have heard of the Mod Squad? Oh, I see all the people my age. Okay, how many have heard of the Pod Squad? Yay, okay, so those of you who know me personally know that I am a huge baseball fan. So I want to introduce to you the team spirit generating, physical activity energizing Padres Pod Squad. They're gonna come up and lead us through some really fun physical activities. And speaking of health equity and health empathy, all of us can do. So enjoy.
Hi, I'm Dave Winfield, Hall of Famer for the San Diego Padres. Now, eating right and staying active has been a huge part of my life. And I want all of you kids, parents, and teachers out there to know that staying active and healthy is a lifelong choice. Now, I've made it my mission to help kids stay fit. And I need all of you to help everybody in San Diego get fit. Get everybody moving in schools, parks, churches, yeah, even where your parents work. Now it's time to get fit. Friar fit, that is. Now, to help me out and spread the word about Friar Fit, I've asked my friend, Dr. Tony Yancey, to come help me out. Tony.
Okay.
All right, good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
All right.
I'm really glad you asked me to come be a part of this Friar Fit Instant Recess program.
Well, listen, Tony, you're an athlete and you're a doctor. I couldn't think of anybody more qualified to handle fitness than you.
Well, thanks, Dave. Well, we've come up with some fun moves for you all to get you up and moving and keep your blood flowing. So if everybody's ready, it's time to stand up. Come on, don't be bashful. Get those arms and feet moving and let's start the show.
All right, let's do it. Now, just like the game has 9 innings, our instant recess break has 9 basic moves. Now let's get the blood flowing with a simple move that you can keep going back to.
Okay, let's get up, let's get moving, let's get that side step going. Step out to the right, feet together, left, feet together. Right and left, right and left, right and left.
Okay now, if you're feeling good, you can always add a little slide to the mix. Like slide to that base. Okay, the first inning is batter on deck. Now I want you to bring your thumbs up to your shoulders, you know, like you're holding the bat behind your neck. Now we're going to add a little twist from side to side from the waist.
This is what we do before we step up to the plate. It stretches our lower back and our core muscles, and it gives us our power for our swing.
Right and left, right and left. Get that core strengthening to the right and to the left.
All right, we're nice and warm, so batter up. I want you to get into the batting position, standing sideways with your feet slightly separated and knees bent, facing the pitcher with either your right foot or your left foot forward. Now I want you to start with the feet, so I want you to step towards the pitcher with your front foot, then bring your right foot back. Bring them together. All right, here we go. Step forward, step back. Catch the beat. Now we're going to add that swing. So get your elbows out here. And I want you to get ready to do your swing. Here we go. Twist your hips. And your core. Take that big swing. Step forward, recover. Come on. Get that swing. Here we go. To the beat.
Don't jerk, just a nice smooth motion. Okay? Got an elbow up. Put that out of the park.
Forward, back. Take that swing. Here we go. Boom. All right.
All right, we're on the mound, ready to fire that fastball. Start with your feet slightly apart, shift your weight to your back leg, and raise your front leg to balance. All right, now we're ready to throw. So imagine you've got a ball in your hand, step with your front leg, and throw.
Arms up and throw. Up and throw. Up and throw. Just see that ball in your hand. Up and throw.
Dr. Tony, you know I played a little college basketball just like you. We should play a little one-on-one.
All right, a lot of fun. Looks good. There you go. All right, you see it in the stands all the time. And for San Diegans, the wave is a way of life. So I want you to bend from the hips and the knees like you're taking a seat, and then you raise your hands. Here you go. All right, a little knee bend, but we call it the wave. There you go.
Stick your bun straight back. Now bring your hands up to your shoulders with your palms facing the sky. As you stand up, straighten those arms and shoot them high up in the air.
Get that rally going for the Padres. All right. Show me the way. Down, up, down, up, down, up. Okay, next inning is called foul ball. Now everyone wants to be able to catch one, but you got to be ready. So step with your feet together. Now we're going to do side-to-side step like we've been doing. Step to the right, put your feet together. Step to the left, feet together. Okay.
Left and right, left and right. Left and right, left and right. Really stretch for that ball. You don't know where the ball's coming from.
All right, I'm so sorry to interrupt this amazing physical activity, but we have to reset the rooms for your next amazing sessions. So the Pod Squad will continue being physically active with you in the exhibit hall. Please go visit them there at the social media booth, and we'll see you at 10:30 for the next session.